there, fantasy owners. Welcome to Lift the Cup Fantasy, or LTC Fantasy as some call it. We're going to continue along with our 21-22 team reviews, and we're going to look at the Montreal Canadiens. Take a look at who led them in stats for goalies, defensemen, and forwards. Who's their biggest fantasy disappointment? Who's their biggest fantasy surprise? And who on their roster was relevant fantasy-wise on a weekly basis? We'll continue to have these videos come out every couple of days. So, because no better way to enjoy the fantasy offseason than watching the NHL playoffs. Some really good series going on right now. Let's go Oilers. And, talk a little bit of fantasy hockey. Don't forget to subscribe. That way you can catch your favorite teams review. Maybe catch your rivals review. Maybe you want to catch all 32. Or just take a peek at a team that sometimes gets overlooked fantasy-wise. So we'll get right into it. For goalies, who led him in games played was Sam Montembeault. He had 38 games played. Who led him in wins was Jake Allen with 9. That's an ugly total when your goalie leader is only 9 wins. He also led him in goals against average at 3.3 and save percentage at .905 for Jake Allen. Obviously, it was a rough season in Montreal. It was a long season. They had Price was out pretty much all year except right at the tail end there. Allen was hurt. Considering the team and how they played this year, that Allen mustered a save percentage over 9 is quite respectable, actually. Just wasn't going to get a lot of wins from him. Basically, it was a disaster for them from the get-go, and as you can see by the goaltending stats, it reflects that. Defenseman stats, who led him in goals, was Jeff Petrie with 6. Assists was Chris Weidman at 23. Petrie and Weidman led him in points at 27 only. William Lagesson led him in plus-minus at a +3. Alex Romanov led him in hits at 227, so the Russian did toss the body around for sure. Also led him in blocks at 144, turning into a nice shutdown guy there. Doesn't really help you fantasy-wise unless in a Cats league, of course, and you're really good in the other Cats, but either way, good defenseman there. And Jeff Petrie led him in shots on goal at 124. Again, as I mentioned with the goalies, it was a long season for them. And if your top defenseman's only getting 27 points, it probably doesn't fare well for your season record, obviously. They did have, like, Romanov in a Cat League did have some value there. Petrie, kind of a streamer. But yeah, kind of a rough season in Montreal. Hard to say too many very optimistic things anyways. Forwards, Cole Caulfield led him in goals at 23, so nice season for him. Nick Suzuki led him in assists at 40. Suzuki also led him in points at 61 points. Plus-minus was Matthew Perreault at +2. Michael Pezzetta led him in hits at 156 hits. Nick Suzuki led him in blocks, 62. Similar to like Kopitar a few reviews back. He, for an offensive guy, leading him in blocks, and nice number of blocks at 62 for a forward. And Cole Caulfield led him in shots on goal at 188. Forwards, obviously, there is a few bright spots there, and Suzuki and Caulfield, obviously, fantasy-wise. They did win the draft lottery, so they'll be adding to that, more than likely going with a forward with the first overall pick, unless they completely pull a Cleveland Browns and surprise you there. Biggest fantasy disappointment for them? Outside of like Weber being hurt and Price being hurt, people that actually played, I'd go with Jeff Petrie. He only had 27 points this year, and he had 4 straight 40-plus point seasons on the back end, and he never came close this year. Yeah, he was out of the lineup a bit, but overall very disappointing from Petrie. Biggest fantasy surprise? Best answer is probably no one. It was such a rough season, I wouldn't really call it a surprise. But considering how slow Caulfield started, and if you look at his second half, he really turned it on in the second half. He was up there with points with the rest of the league. He had a really good second half. And hopefully that carries forward for the Canadiens and their fans, because they need some good news there. Fantasy relevant on a weekly basis? Really, there's 2. There's Caulfield and Suzuki there. Sorry. Other than that, depends what they do in the draft, but Especially in the second half, Caulfield and Suzuki were really, really good. Streamers, it was such a bad season that it's hard to really tell. You could spot start Petrie at times. Weidman had a little stretch for a week here, a week there. To be honest, you weren't picking up a Montreal player or streaming them unless it was a really light night or a very favorable matchup. Hope you did enjoy today's episode. We'll be out in a couple of days with another one there. Enjoy the fantasy offseason there, fantasy owners, and the rest of the NHL playoffs.